Hello, IR class. Dr. Maiden here with the last lecture for section 4 of our class. So section 4 was all about economic security. This is the last lecture, 4.5, for that section about the global wealth gap. But before we dive into that, I thought we could do something fun here, and I am going to do a one-card draw tarot reading for one of you guys and tell you your fortune. So yes, I was taken in by the checkout counter display at a Barnes & Noble a couple of months ago and bought this silly travel pack tarot thing just because I was curious. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to do a one-card draw tarot reading for one of you guys. So let me just shuffle the deck here. Let me pick someone. Pick someone. I'll do Paul. Paul, this is going to be a one-card draw for you, your fortune. All right, so I drew the card here, a 10 of rods. So it looks like an old guy walking to a castle carrying a bundle of sticks. So let's go. We're going to see, Paul, what does this mean? We're going to go to the book here, 10 of rods. Rods is in the back. No, that's cups, rods. Okay, king, knight, page 10. 10 of rods. All right, here we go. 10 of rods for Paul. This is old man staggering under the weight of many burdens. Are you feeling burned out, Paul? The pressure will ease soon. Physical exercise and relaxation will help maintain your health. Oh, that's a nice one. That's good for everyone. Maybe all of us are feeling like Paul here. Paul, maybe you're not feeling this. Maybe all of us are feeling a little burned out. The pressure will ease soon. So physical exercise and relaxation will help us all maintain our health. That's it. That's a nice one. All right, there we go. There's our one-card draw for Paul. And we'll say it's kind of retroactive. It'll work for all of us. All right. There's your fortune for the day. We're going to, like I said, finish section 4 on economic security. This one's going to be about the global wealth gap. There's going to be lots of maps that we're looking at with this as we're trying to piece apart all these different ways that we can think about and measure wealth. All right. So we're going to start with a couple of definitions here. You have probably heard these before. We've probably used them in this class before. And it's the difference between developed countries and less developed countries. Pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting concept. It is a highly subjective concept because who gets to, from a social constructivist perspective, who defines developed? Who defines less developed? Who creates the categories and then puts countries in them? Do we create the categories first and then put the countries in them? Or do we see where countries are and decide to put boxes around them to create exclusionary measures, right? Social constructivists could go a lot of different ways with that. So developed. A developed country is a wealthy country with an economy that tends to produce manufactured goods and services for export. The more high-skilled, high-level manufacturing, the more developed you are, even within the bracket of developed. So if you're just doing something like, yeah, you have a really strong textile industry, that is going to be in a bracket lower than something like a Japan that is, well, we do really high-end electronics and smart cars. We're up here in terms of our manufacturing compared to textiles or something like that, or like cheap furniture, right? Less developed countries then. We typically use the word LDC. So an LDC is a country that is poor or has an economy that is less able to support its population. So these countries typically export raw materials and agricultural goods and are forced to then import the actual things that they need, like furniture and textiles and cars, okay? We're going to unpack a couple of different terms here. You have probably heard all of these terms before. I would say raise your hand, right? You can be sitting there by yourself. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the term GDP. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of PPP. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Gini, the Gini coefficients, right? If anyone's ever heard of GDP, PPP, GNI, We're going to break those down and look at what that means for understanding this gap between the wealthy and the poor in the world today. So we're going to start with GDP. GDP is, comment down below if you know it. I'll wait a second. GDP is gross domestic product. So that is the measure of a country's development. It is the total size of the economy divided by population. All right. So the book did a really great job of breaking this down to understand what this can look like and how we can understand the wide disparity in GDPs of the wealthy, the haves, and the have-nots in the world today. So this is using 2016 data. So in 2016, the average GDP worldwide average of all countries, GDP was $10,390. That's not a lot of money, right? If we're thinking US, $10,390 for a year. That's far less than $1,000 a month. If you were here in the US trying to live on that as your average GDP, okay? $10,390 a month. But let's break this down across a couple of countries, and I have it here on the slide. That's the average, that's the middle. If we're looking the very tippy top of the average, Luxembourg for 2016 had a GDP of $111,000. That's $111,000 per person in Luxembourg. Norway, a little bit below that, about very close to $90,000. $90,000 was their GDP. All right. The US, 52. All right, so now we're getting into numbers that we're a little bit more familiar with. If you think of the average person in the US, that's a pretty average salary for someone in the US to have around 52. But then we keep going down, and when you look at the fact that this is by size of population. So Luxembourg, really, really small European country, little population. So it keeps going smaller as the population size increases. So now we're at a place like China. China for 2016, their GDP was not even $7,000, not even $7,000. All right. India did not make $2,000. It's $1,861. That was their GDP in 2016. Okay. So you're thinking how many people your total economy is divided across your population. 1861. Then you go to these countries that are some of the poorest countries in the world. So the two at the bottom of the list, Central African Republic, the GDP for 2016 was $326. That is less than $1 a day. $326. Burundi, $218. All right, so that is the range that we are looking at. A Luxembourg way up here with $111,000, Burundi down here with $218 for the year. All right, so the 12 poorest countries in the world in 2016 had a GDP below $550. 12 countries. 28 countries had a GDP below $1,000. All right, so that's just trying to break apart and help us understand this wealth gap a little bit better. I'm throwing up a picture now that's really useful. So map 10.1 shows the countries of the world sized by population. All right, so you can see clearly a total inflation in countries like Nigeria, India, China. They're thrown completely out of proportion. Japan's totally out of proportion. The US is totally out of proportion on this map compared to these other countries. Then map 10.2 is the countries of the world sized by GDP per capita. So you can see just how much change there is. Look at how distorted Europe becomes in particular. And Africa, oh my gosh, Africa becomes almost non-existent, the middle of Africa. The US has grown in size, almost 3 times larger than it was, all right? So this is showing the impact of population sizes on your actual GDP. So let's take a pause here and then we'll come back and we'll talk about PPP. All right, welcome back here. We're going to talk about PPP and Gini coefficients, but first I wanted to take an opportunity to say I have been doing some more coloring with my son Ben, and of course it's Lion King themed, and I thought you guys would want to see it. This is the most recent one that I did, and I picked this one. This is Zazu freaking out. He's very concerned there. You can see his face as Nala is leaping off into danger. And I think this is how most parents are feeling if they're stuck at home with their kids right now. I am Zazu, I am the bird, and Nala is my child attempting to run off and touch people and touch things, and just in general, I've got a low battery light here. Just in general, cause mayhem, and I am just flying behind him, doing my best to keep up. Guys, it's been a really, really tough time. My husband and I are struggling, and we only have one, right? I cannot imagine some of these families that are out there with, my friend has 5 kids at her house. I would die. I would just be dead. Tough time. I hope you all are doing great. I hope you all are having a nice time, a relaxing time. Take care of each other. Take care of your family. Take care of your friends. We're doing the best we can here. But let's get back on target here. Understanding PPP. PPP is purchasing power parity. So this is a measure that compares 2 currencies and adjusts them so that they can be compared in a meaningful way. So PPP allows us to compare purchasing power parity of something like the yen in Japan with the peso in Mexico. The Economist created this, it kind of started as a silly thing, but it's actually quite meaningful if you think about it, the Big Mac index. So what they did was they compared the value of currencies based on the price of a McDonald's Big Mac using the US as a baseline. So as you can see from the image that I'm posting up here, the US is your baseline country, where this is 2018 prices, or 2017-2018 prices. The US, $5.28. It was $5.28 to buy a Big Mac. So you can see in countries like Switzerland, it's almost $7 for that sandwich. It's a $2 upcharge for the same sandwich, compared to Russia, where it's $2.29. So this is not only, this is reflective of the cost of a Big Mac, but also the purchasing power parity of these different currencies related to the US dollar, all right? So an example would be something like middle class. Middle class in the US, we typically have kind of an about line, a cutoff line of around $35,000. If you make $35,000 a year, you are considered middle class in the US. 32 countries fit into this category. That's only 17% of the world's population. 32 of these countries can say, yeah, we can be at or above that line, okay? 17% of the world's population would fall into a US standard of middle class. The poverty line in the middle class at this point is at $12,000 a person. So if you only make $12,000 a year or less, you are officially below the poverty line. 88 countries in the world meet this standard. That's 66.7% of the world's population. So if we're looking at where is the wealth being held, I'll pop map 10.3 up. You'll be looking at that right now. Percentage of population living on less than $2 a day. Where is the world's wealth? Who is holding it compared to the rest of the world? Most of this map is red. More of this map is red than not red. That means that percentages of people are living on less than $2 a day, okay? Over 2/3 of the world's population live in poverty. So let's do our last one here, Gini. Understanding Gini, G-I-N-I, Gini coefficients. So this is a measure of the distribution of income in a country ranging from 0 to 1, where 0 means perfect equality and 1 means perfect inequality. The attempt here is this is meant to be a way to measure inequality within countries. So the World Bank actually adjusts it a little bit, and they go from 0 to 100, not 0 to 1. But the idea here would be no country is perfectly equal or unequal. So what it would be saying is if the US was a case study, to get a 0 score, every single person in the US would have to be making exactly only $40,000 and no more or no less. So no Bill Gates, no Bezos, no Trump, no one is able to make more than $40,000. That would be perfect equality. Obviously, no one is attempting to pursue that, but that's what we're saying, perfect equality. Okay, perfect inequality, getting a 1 score would be no one has the same value. Again, kind of what's the point of that? But we're just trying to judge what's a happy medium here, okay? So according to most studies, the most equal country would be Norway, where you have the most people living closest to a standard of living that is relatively similar. This is largely due to the very strong social policies they've pursued. You probably remember this from our Marxism lecture, that they have it's a hybrid socialist regime, democratic socialist regime, high degree of social programming that allows for them to have high standard of living and the closest equality score of any of the countries. The least equal, this might be surprising to you, South Africa, okay? So least equal in the sense that you have, maybe it's not as surprising once you actually pause and think about it, this is a holdover from decades of apartheid era policies, okay? So you have an incredibly wealthy white population, and you have black populations that are living in abject poverty, all right? So you have a wide disparity in these populations. And there are more black South Africans living in abject poverty than there are white South Africans living in luxury. So it creates this imbalance of high inequality scores, okay? The US, interestingly, is almost kind of perfectly in the middle of those two. So you've got your South Africa and your Norway. We're kind of perfectly in the middle of those two extremes. What we can say with Gini coefficients, what this helps us understand, is that the wealthiest 10% of the global population controls over half of the world's wealth. Over 50% of all the world's wealth is held by less than 10% of the world's population, okay? So the other 90% of people on this earth have to make do with the other less than half then wealth of the world, all right? So I'm throwing up a map again here, map 10-4. This is worldwide Gini coefficients, where you can see here the extent to which countries are middling, are kind of the peachy color. The darker blue you get, the more equal you are. The darker red you get, the more inequality that you have, okay? So again, this should not be super surprising given all the different maps we've looked at this semester and the way we've broken down and been trying to understand maps and trends that we're seeing across countries. The countries that have the largest populations, that have the largest internal inequality, that have some of the biggest challenges facing them in terms of corrupt governments. In particular, you can see in the case of Southern Africa being the most red, these are all these apartheid states, right? You've got Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, all lighting up red. Surprisingly, this is one case where DRC is not lighting up because they have abject poverty, but everyone's in it together. They don't have the extremes of inequality within country, right? That's what this one is measuring, inequality within countries, not inequality compared to other countries. So we're going to end here with this question. Why are some countries rich and others poor? And the root of understanding this, why are some countries rich and others poor, comes to understanding structural factors. Structural factors are the historical and environmental factors that influence how a country can develop its economy, okay? So there are two key structural factors I want us to look at to end out this lecture. The first one is natural resources in the environment. So you are in a better position structurally if you have a lot of arable land for agriculture, if you have the right climate for agriculture, for the type of agriculture that you're pursuing, right? So Japan does not have the land to do tobacco farming and corn farming. It does have the land to really corner the market in rice farming. So that's what they did. Also, do you have resources? This should be an obvious one. Do you have oil, phosphates, gold, coal, timber? That's been the big issue with Brazil right now, the fact of they've got a lot of timber. They could be a lot more productive on the international market with trading in timber. Problem is, that timber is the Amazon rainforest. So people do not want them to participate in the global economy in the way that they could because they don't want them to cut down their timber. Okay? In some cases, resources can be very, very beneficial. In the case of the US, we maximized use of our resources and we developed at a very rapid rate. Other countries that have a resource, particularly if you only have one resource and that resource is very lucrative, we're talking mainly about oil. Oil is the big resource that you have to be concerned about, that in a lot of countries that have oil, it's sort of all they have. And so you will become a one export industry around this one thing. And it can lead to what we call the resource curse, where it will actually limit your ability to develop because control over this one thing, in the case of oil, control over this one thing that is oil will lead to corruption, will lead to the formation of autocratic regimes, will lead to conflict across countries. It will lead to things like Sudan, South Sudan attempting to split away, Kurdistan attempting to become its own country. And oil is at the heart of why the conflicts drag on as long as they do, because no one wants to give up their ability to have access to oil. The other structural, number two, the other structural element that's very important for understanding why some countries are rich and others are poor is colonial history. So in the case of former colonies like Australia, New Zealand, US, we benefited from having a shared respect for property rights, equality under the law, importance of education, the fact that, this is central to it as well, that we were the same color as the people that were colonizing us. That mattered, so that we had a fundamentally different colonial experience than all of the other colonies in the world that were colonies used to be looted of their goods and resources, and controlled to be used as a tax base. All right, so we did get some of that as well, obviously, but it was fundamentally different the way that it happened to white colonies like the US, Australia, New Zealand, compared to the rest of the colonies. So what we essentially have had since the end of the colonial era has been what we refer to as NeoColonialism. We talked about this with our Marxism lecture, right? This is the heart of something like world systems theory, that we can say, okay, yeah, colonization ended, right? Yeah, it's over. But for most of the countries in the developing world, they're saying, no, it is not. It is not over. It never ended. It will never be over. We have just transitioned into this new thing called neoliberal global capitalism, and it is nothing more than neocolonialism. So it is just one more way that you, the North, the West, white people, get richer and richer and richer and richer, necessarily at my expense. So it's this challenge of resource curse combined with colonial heritage, combined with the spread and the strength of neoliberal global capitalism, and who are the drivers of that, and who are necessarily the victims of that type of a strategy. Okay, so I'd love if you have any questions or any comments about this, the global wealth gap. I threw a lot of information at you with this one, but it's important for us to be thinking about in terms of what does the world look like, not only across the world, comparing across countries, but within countries. It's important for us to be understanding how do we get the degree of inequality we have within countries as well. Okay, so question, comment down below. I'd love for us to be thinking about broader trends in terms of economic security. What does this mean for economic security that we have such a devastating wealth gap around the world and within countries? Okay, this is going to be important as we transition into the last section as well on human security. So that's section 5. It's our last section for the semester. Human security is up next. Okay, have a great day.